people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Last night in Argentina, in the women's light flyweight division, reigning unified champion Evelyn Bermudez successfully defended her 2 alphabet titles against the challenger Yerineth Altuve. The prediction stuck, and
I went with Evelyn Bermudez to retain her 2 alphabet titles against the very seasoned Yerineth Altuve.
And it would seem that time has proven me right. Evelyn Bermudez won a dominant points decision win over the seasoned fighter, the seasoned challenger,
Evelyn Bermudez of the Fighting Bermudez sisters.
the very decorated Daniela Bermudez, Evelyn Bermudez, and Roxana Bermudez. Fighting
Fighting is a family business. Fighting is a family trade for the Fighting Bermudez sisters.
It's what they do, and it's who they are. In many ways, Evelyn Bermudez could be described as this division's apex predator because she is this division's only unified champion of which there are 3. Evelyn Bermudez holding the IBF and WBO titles, newly crowned WBA champion of Mexico, Jessica Neri Plata, and long-reigning champion Yesenia Gomez, who's going to be in action very soon in Canada against unbeaten up-and-comer Kim Clavel. Of the 3 champions at this weight, Evelyn Bermudez could be described as this division's apex predator and the #1 light flyweight in the world.
No squirrely amateur.
She is a seasoned fighter, a seasoned champion, having reigned as this division's IBF champion since December of 2018, more recently picking up the newly vacated WBO title in March of this year.
There's a credible argument that Evelyn is the #1 light flyweight in the world and this division's apex predator.
At least for the time being, she is. Very recently, news broke that Senicia Estrada, East LA's own Senicia Estrada, 2-division champion Senicia Estrada, very recently news broke that she parted ways with Golden Boy Promotions, and at least for the time being, she is a network and promotional free agent.
Senicia Estrada, who's been dividing her time between minimum weight and light flyweight.
Because Golden Boy Promotions very recently signed Costa Rica's own reigning IBF champion at minimum weight, Yo Costa Valle, and because Yo Costa Valle herself detailed that she's currently in negotiations for a Thi Nuñan unification match, those 2 champions at minimum weight, becoming the minimum weight division's undisputed champion could prove difficult for Senicia Estrada now that she's not with Golden Boy Promotions anymore. We've talked about that, and we talked about how Senicia might so decide to return to the light flyweight division where Golden Boy Promotions doesn't have any ponies in that light flyweight show. If she does, Evelyn Bermudez could become a person of interest for Senicia Estrada, because it just so happens that Evelyn Bermudez is in possession of the WBO title. The WBO title that Senicia Estrada once held, the WBO title that she very recently vacated.
We've talked about that.
We've talked about how the WBO put Senicia Estrada on the spot. Senicia Estrada being a multi-weight champion, having held alphabet titles at 2 weights simultaneously. The WBO's got a rule. They don't allow any of their champions to hold alphabet titles at more than 1 weight, so they forced her to choose, at which point she chose to vacate the WBO light flyweight title to hang on to the WBA minimum weight title, at which point Evelyn Bermudez came in and picked it up.
So what if Senicia Estrada decides to return to the light flyweight division? And what if she decides to target Evelyn Bermudez for what she's got?
She'd sooner have more luck attempting to unify the light flyweight division than the minimum weight division, because Golden Boy Promotions has ponies in that minimum weight show, whereas at light flyweight, the division is an open book.
And if she gets Evelyn in the ring, she could fight for 2 alphabet titles in one fell swoop.
Get back her old status as this division's WBO champion and add the blue belt, the IBF title, to her collection. It's definitely a possibility.
The landscape at 108 pounds is definitely changing.
With newly crowned WBA champion Jessica Neri Plata prying that WBA title away from long-reigning champion of Argentina, Jessica Bopp, very soon the green belt is going to be up for grabs. That's going to be on the line in Gomez versus Clavel, and I like Kim Clavel's chances. I think this division is going to see yet another newly crowned champion.
And of course, there's Evelyn Bermudez, who we just talked about, this division's only unified champion.
These fighters, these champions at these weights, they're not aging fighters like Jessica Bopp was. They're not aging champions like Tenkai Tsunami. These are fresh-faced fighters, all in their prime.
The landscape at 108 pounds is changing, and unifying this division could prove a little bit more difficult than it would have before.
It could. I give Sinicia good odds to beat anyone from minimum weight up to light flyweight, and even super flyweight, because she is that good. But I will say that unifying the light flyweight division could prove a little bit more difficult now than it would have before, because before you had a lot of aging champions, whereas now you got a lot of fresh faces.
A lot of fighters that are in their physical prime, the same way that Sinicia Estrada is in her physical prime.
There's some very exciting fights to be made. Estrada versus Bermudez being one among them.
And I think that's something we could see down the line, because I suspect Sinicia Estrada will return to the light flyweight division.
When she does, Evelyn Bermudez may quickly become a person of interest. Congratulations to her for successfully defending her 2 alphabet titles this past weekend, but as stated, there is more work that will need doing. In men's lightweight news per tweet from Michael Benson, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, Vasyl Lomachenko's return fight is being planned for October. Bob Arum has revealed, he said, Lomachenko versus Shakur Stevenson is a fight that has to be made in the not-too-distant future, potentially next year. We know that Shakur Stevenson, he may be on borrowed time as a unified super featherweight champion. He's currently down there at 130 pounds, set to return to action very soon against Robson Conceição. Because the other alphabet titles...
Joe Cordina's IBF titles at Matchroom.
Reigning WBA champion Roger Gutierrez is set to defend his WBA title against Hector Garcia on the undercard of Broner versus Figueroa.
It's a PBC show, and by all rights, that WBA title's currently on PBC Island.
You don't get the sense that Shakur Stevenson will be afforded the chance to become his division's undisputed champion the same way that, say, Devin Haney has become his division's undisputed champion. You get the sense that Shakur Stevenson could be moving up in 2-3 fights.
He's supposed to be returning to action against Robson Conceição in late September.
Most people are going with Shakur Stevenson to win that fight. I'm picking Shakur Stevenson to win that fight. In the following month, Vasyl Lomachenko is supposed to be returning to action. I had hoped that we'd get Vasyl Lomachenko versus Devin Haney before this year's out.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for, but Devin's going to end up fighting George again. He's likely going to end up beating George again.
It's a distinct possibility. And what Bob Arum's talking about is a potential Vasyl Lomachenko versus Shakur Stevenson fight. Currently, Shakur's at 130, Vasyl Lomachenko's up there at 135. I imagine that this matchup would entail Shakur Stevenson moving up to 135, moving up to lightweight.
Few thoughts on this.
Now, this goes back to what I told you guys in a previous video in reference to Ryan Garcia, Gervonta Davis, the bubble that they're in. Ryan Garcia having officially moved up to 140 pounds. Gervonta Davis and his team being insistent that a fight between him and Ryan happen at lightweight, happen at 135. The biosphere that they have created for themselves and the bubble that they're in, the perceived notion that they're the biggest game in town, when in reality, them not fighting these other fighters, them not fighting these other guys, like Vasyl Lomachenko, like Devin Haney,
and like Shakur Stevenson when the time comes.
It's not stopping anything, you understand. The show will go on because the show must go on. And while those two guys are going back and forth by way of social media, taking barbs at each other, the fighters, the other fighters that are around these weights, they're going to be fighting. They're going to be creating excitement. I love the idea of Lomachenko versus Haney or Lomachenko versus Stevenson when the time comes. Those are very exciting fights.
And it's going to be hard to sell Gervonta Davis as any kind of an authority at lightweight when these are the fighters that he's not fighting.
What's his body of work as a lightweight? Yuriorkis Gamboa? Isaac Cruz? More recently, Rolly Romero?
Give me a break.
This news reference to a potential Stevenson versus Lomachenko fight next year, in tandem with the news that Devin Haney is going to be boxing George Kambosos again before the end of this year. What stands out the most to me about this news is that the show's going on without Gervonta Davis, without Ryan Garcia, that those two boys, they might figure that they're the biggest game with two of the biggest names in town, and a fight between them might actually be commercially viable, commercially successful. But unless they're actually about to have that fight,
Which I don't think they are.
you really can't substitute the excitement that other fighters might create with their fights that they're actually having with the build-up of your fight. What is to be your fight with Gervonta Davis? What is to be your fight with Ryan Garcia? Anybody with a clue, anybody with a half a functioning brain cell isn't actually expecting to see Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis in the near and immediate future.
I mean, look at what's going on. They're arguing over what platform's going to do it, at what weight the fight's going to take place.
Naturally, Floyd is saying that Gervonta's the A side and it's got to happen down there at lightweight, whereas Ryan Garcia is saying that it could happen at any time, in any place, at any weight, even though he's officially moved up to 140 pounds. And there is also DAZN as a platform to consider.
Yeah, Floyd, Gervonta, and Stefan Espinoza might want to cut DAZN out of the picture, out of the deal.
That's easier said than done because DAZN is Golden Boy Promotions' broadcast partner, and Golden Boy Promotions promotes Ryan Garcia, so it's not cut and dry. Doesn't look like it's a fight that's going to happen before this year is out. We could see this going on for at least another 12 months. That's reality. And while this is going on, these back and forth barbs that they're trading, well, that's no substitute for actual fights and actual excitement.
Devin Haney makes it past George Kambosos Jr. for a second time. The conversation might turn into Devin Haney versus Vasyl Lomachenko.
If Devin Haney decides to move up in weight afterwards, maybe he don't stick around at lightweight anymore, the reset button on that division gets hit, at which point Vasyl Lomachenko might see himself pick up an alphabet title or two, titles he might defend against Shakur Stevenson upon his ascent to the lightweight division. There's a lot of ways it could break down, but the bottom line is Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis, in spite of what they might think,
They can't monopolize all the attention at or around these weights with a fight they're not about to have.
in a scenario like that where Devin Haney beats George Kambosos Jr. for a second time, decides to move up to 140 pounds, vacates all the belts, the conversation could become Devin Haney versus Teofimo Lopez. Yet another great fight involving young fighters at or around these weights. Meanwhile, down at 135, the conversation becomes Lomachenko versus Stevenson. And you see what I'm getting at. These two guys can't monopolize all the attention at or around these weights the same way that, say, Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao did with their fight and all that build-up. 5 years worth, because this fight is not the equivalent of that fight. You know, Floyd and Manny were perceived as the number one and number two pound-for-pound fighters in their sport, whereas Gervonta Davis ain't the number one lightweight in the world, and Ryan Garcia certainly isn't the number one super lightweight in the world. The show must go on.
I mean, yeah, Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis is a big commercial fight. Casuals are going to take it in, but it has to actually happen.
So the question then becomes, is it about to happen? And you know the answer.
God forbid that one of them loses before it does.
I don't put the kibosh on the whole goddamn thing.
What do you see for the future of Shakur beyond this fight?
Well, I can't talk for Garcia because obviously he fights for Golden Boy, and we haven't broached anything with them. But in our own stable, hopefully we get Lomachenko back in action, and he's everything okay. He gets leave from the Ukrainian military. We can get Lomachenko in action in October, and then next year, a lot of ways for Lomachenko to go. One fight that has to be made, maybe not next for either guy, but down the road, probably next year, a fight that everybody would die to see is Shakur Stevenson and Lomachenko. And both guys want that fight.
In broaching that subject specifically, it leaves a lot to the imagination. How soon can we expect Vasyl Lomachenko to square off against Shakur Stevenson? It's obviously not next because Shakur is fighting Robson Conceição, and Vasyl Lomachenko set to return the following month in October against an opponent that has yet to be announced. How's he going to look? Is he going to be the same guy that just battered both Masayoshi Nakatani and Richard Comey? Hasn't been 12 months since he had a fight, but it will be the night of the fight if he does in fact return in October, and will he be the same guy? And even if he is,
How would a fight with Shakur Stevenson look?
I see a very similar dynamic in Shakur Stevenson versus Vasyl Lomachenko to Devin Haney versus Vasyl Lomachenko, in the sense that both Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney, they're both pure boxers, economic outside jabbers that go for finesse more than they go for ferocity. The difference being that Shakur Stevenson is a southpaw. He's a southpaw like Vasyl Lomachenko is a southpaw. In truth, I view Shakur as being a little bit better, a little bit trickier.
Because he's a southpaw, I view him as being a little bit trickier than Devin Haney, who's an orthodox fighter. He leads with his left.
Whereas Shakur Stevenson leads with his right the same way that Vasyl Lomachenko leads with his right. A fight between them would be a battle of the southpaws.
I also think that upon his ascent to 135 pounds, Shakur might prove to be a little bit more durable than Devin Haney.
I think Shakur at lightweight might prove to be a little bit more durable than Devin, because I think Devin is in the process. I think he's currently in the process of outgrowing 135 pounds, outgrowing the lightweight division. I think his days at that weight, they are numbered, whereas Shakur, he'd be moving up to that weight, not having to cut down all the way to 130, not having to cut that extra 5.
That might add something to his performance, add something to his power.
Remember, this is a very young guy whose body's still growing. He's campaigned as low as 126 pounds. Up there at 135, he might be a lot stronger than what we've seen so far. A lot faster, too.
More energized.
The stylistic matchup between them is about the same as what you would see in Devin Haney versus Vasyl Lomachenko, with some slight differences, some nuances.
And you know, Vasyl Lomachenko, he's all about the nuances.
His base style lives somewhere between the boxer-puncher that goes in there looking to hurt the guy and the pressure fighter that looks to overwhelm him. But Vasyl Lomachenko is no mere pressure fighter. He's got a lot of nuances, a lot of tools in that toolbox. The way that he cuts angles, pivots, and shifts, and throws punches from
A lot of different angles.
He knows how to find those blind spots and hit you with shots that you don't see. But the same can be said for Shakur Stevenson, who's not as prolific a puncher.
But he's quick.
At lightweight, you would have to give the edge in experience and power to Vasyl Lomachenko, though Shakur Stevenson, given that he's so young, so fresh, and so fast, that speed, it can make you think twice about coming through the front door when you get popped.
1 or 2 counter shots that a guy don't see might make the guy hesitant.
Though at the same time, Shakur Stevenson only lets go 1 or 2 shots at a time, whereas Vasyl Lomachenko is a lot more busy.
1 or 2 shots gonna be enough to keep that guy out?
Vasyl Lomachenko's volume, the kind of volume that can cause your run-of-the-mill pure boxer to come apart at the seams. Is Shakur Stevenson your run-of-the-mill pure boxer, though?
Only one way to find out.